Hi everyone, welcome to episode 75 of the Geekly. My name is Jules.
I'm Lex.
Today we're talking about amazing stories. We're talking about Westworld season 1. We're talking about Devs episode 1. We're also talking about Picard, the latest episode of Picard. I mean, talk to me about amazing stories, Lex, because I have a feeling I know what's coming, but let's do this anyway.
I've never watched the original series, which aired in, the 70s, the 60s?
80s, I think.
80s,
I think this came after The Twilight Zone. It was heavily inspired by, I think.
Okay.
And it kind of came along afterwards.
Well, I've never seen it. This is my first encounter with amazing stories, and I'm suitably unimpressed. This story is basically time travel through barometric pressure, and I didn't care about anybody. About halfway through it, I did the thing where it was how much of this do I have left to watch? I mean, I went into this with very low expectations because I saw the reviews that were all basically saying the same thing. So I wasn't horribly surprised that it was a bit shit. Yeah, I would not recommend this.
It was kind of charming. It was kind of inoffensive. It was kind of low rent Hallmark time travel, like a beginner's guide to time travel kind of.
Yeah, I mean the whole ending where the guy wrote the letter and was I love you, but okay. First of all, people falling in love and wanting to spend their lives with each other after a matter of hours just pisses me off.
Yeah, agreed.
I hate that trope so much. It's so unrealistic, and it drives me crazy. They kind of just went all in. The brother was yeah, I could tell he really loved you, and they barely know each other.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was a huge turnoff for me. Then the whole letter he wrote, yeah, I got stuck in the past, but I finally found my place. And there was nothing in his character development that indicated that he would be better suited to the past. Her, yeah, you could definitely see she was a very forward-thinking woman. She was kind of stuck in a shitty situation because of her time period and her family's finances and stuff. Her going to the future made sense. Him being stuck in the past and happy with that was just ridiculous. It was where did that come from?
It was very strange because this whole episode of TV, all I was thinking to myself was, who is this for? Who is this aimed at? And I just thought this is...
Boomers, that's who.
I thought this was an episode of TV on a TV channel called something like the OAP friendly inoffensive TV channel, where he came off as a brash millennial. He was swiping on Tinder the whole way through, wasn't listening to what his brother was saying, and he sent to the past. And it felt like the committee that made this decided that millennials needed to be brought back in time to kind of, sand off the edges, make them a bit more well-rounded as individuals. And he was so relaxed by the prospect of being trapped 100 years in the past. He never freaked out at all. He was so relaxed. And then, he's do you know what? I feel so at home here. This is where I'm supposed to be. Where I had too many choices. And... like you said, it wasn't forecast at all that was the kind of person he was. It felt if anything, he would be, as I would be, it'd be something of a waking nightmare to be in 1919 without certain technological advancements.
Yeah, if I got sent back to 1919, there would be kind of a novelty effect at first, but after probably about a week, I'd be alright, screw this. I want air conditioning, cell phones, internet, indoor plumbing, cars.
Throughout the whole episode, the pacing was just a million miles an hour. Oh, I found this photograph. I wonder what it means. Oh, I found this word cabbages. I wonder what it means. And then, the next scene, these things were resolved so quickly. They fell in love immediately. There was almost no conflict throughout the entire thing. Every plan they had sort of was acted out almost immediately. The fact that he could ping pong backwards and forwards in time.
And then, he comes back from the future and he's that's it, the wine cellar that's ruined the pressure in the room. We have to get rid of it. And his brother was okay, cool.
Yeah.
I think, actually, the only thing I liked about this was the brother. And as I was watching, I was just thinking, how cool it is that we've gotten to a point where gay characters are just presented as normal. Nothing was made of it except he showed a picture to Evelyn. It was yeah, this is my brother and his husband and their kid that they just adopted. And that was kind of it. And so I was just thinking it's cool that we've gotten to that point in media, but that's the only positive that I took from the show.
Would you buy Apple TV for this?
Fuck no. I don't know what Apple TV is doing because we've done something else that was on Apple.
Mythic Quest, which we thought was
okay,
strong.
That was good, but
they've got about a 50% hit ratio, we think, at the moment.
This is not selling it for me.
Yeah. One thing I will say, and might be a bit controversial, this felt more the Twilight Zone than probably 6 of the Twilight Zone episodes did to me. Whether it's, it was a good episode or bad episode, it felt like moralistic and kind of small scale in terms of like what I perceive the Twilight Zone to be. And a lot of the episodes in the actual Jordan Peele relaunch of the Twilight Zone didn't feel that way to me. They felt like they were trying to be something entirely different, maybe almost competing with Black Mirror sometimes. This felt Twilight Zone-y. It wasn't good enough, but it felt Twilight Zone-y. That's my best compliment, I think.
I can kind of see that. Like, if the writers for Lifetime movies thought, let's do a Twilight Zone episode, this is probably what they would come up with.
Okay, let's move on to Devs.
That was a weird show.
It was weird. I think the trailers did a very good job at not spoiling anything.
Yeah, I mean, I remember when you first mentioned it, I kind of looked it up, and then I forgot what it was about, and then going in to watch it for this week, I looked at, like, the little episode summary, and I thought, that's kind of off-brand for us, because it basically just said this girl's boyfriend goes missing from a tech company. That's it. That was all I had going into it. And then, like, the opening sequence with Nick Offerman and the surrealness of it, I was sitting there thinking, what the fuck have I gotten myself into? And then it just kind of went from there, and it was really creepy and uncomfortable to watch in a lot of respects.
Yeah, it felt like a kind of sci-fi horror hybrid. I like that Nick Offerman it's almost like a religious thing. There's a lot of kind of church.
He is creepy as fuck.
Oh my god, he is so perfect in it. I've never seen him do anything like this before, to be honest. He's got that kind of long hair.
Yeah, I mean, I've only seen him in comedic roles,
yeah.
and him in this is like, he is genuinely terrifying.
You get the kind of the church music playing. His Devs building looks like a cathedral. And he seems to, it's only episode 1, but it seems like he's established some kind of cult, and they're also to do with technology, and I'm really looking forward to seeing how it plays out. It's set on this kind of tech campus near San Francisco. The thing I liked about it is that all the shots of the campus made it feel very remote, even though it's probably very close to San Francisco. The shots you get are the coastal side, so it looks like an island surrounded by water. You've got all this lush forest around it as well. So it's the kind of place where horror takes place.
Can we just mention the giant ass little girl that's just standing there creepily over everything?
That is amazing. That is absolutely amazing. I saw that in the trailers and I thought, what on earth is that? Yeah,
there's no context given about it at all. You get these like panning, landscape shots, like scene setting and whatever, and there's just this giant young girl.
Yeah, I mean, my very sad assumption is that is Amaya, and that's his daughter that he has lost tragically at some point, and that's a story we're going to get. But aesthetically, it's just superb. It's she's looming down on people. Let's talk briefly about the plot. A guy called Sergei, Russian, getting promotion from AI to devs, this kind of mystery department that nobody really knows what happens there. And he has this kind of HR evaluation where they're like, you're Russian, we've got this tech, as if he's going to steal their tech. And guess what? He tries to steal their tech. So I was like, okay.
Can I just say, like, the best line of the whole thing was when Nick Offerman, first of all, like, just appeared in the woods and the lights came up. But then he says, you stole my code with your James Bond watch.
I mean, that was a scene.
Yeah.
That was a scene. The guy, Sergei, thinks he's gotten away with it and just runs into the woods, and suddenly all these little lights turn on. They're like little halos around trees.
Yeah, and I'd wondered what they were when they were walking, when he was taking Sergei to the devs compound. You just kind of saw these rings around the trees, and I was like, what the hell is that? But then, you get to the compound, and there are just these, like, huge copper pillars for no reason, so I was like, okay, maybe it's just some, modern art thing. No, they're lights. Yeah, and that was a bit creepy. He's, stumbling through the woods at night, and all of these lights come up, and Nick Offerman's just standing there. And then he goes on this huge thing about determinism. Yeah. And I was just sitting there like, what the fuck am I watching?
Yeah. He was like basically saying, I forgive you. I know what you've done, and I forgive you. This was out of your control. The decision for this to be made was made like long ago, and this is just,
Yeah, there's no other thing that you could have possibly done.
And then some dude comes out with a bag and suffocates him with it.
Yeah, and
Alison Pill comes up as well. She was pulling double duty this week, Picard and this. And Nick Offerman and Alison Pill just watch on as this guy suffocates Sergei to death. And then the story going forward will be his girlfriend kind of looking for him and trying to figure out what's happening, what devs is. What did you think of this episode of TV?
It's pretty amazing, actually. I'm not really sure kind of like where it's going to go or what's going to happen. I wasn't hugely invested in the girlfriend character, but they didn't spend a lot of time on her. We spent most of our time with Sergei. And I was suitably upset when they killed him, because I was quite invested in him. You know, we entered devs with him. We got his anxiety. We've sort of been teased with hints about what the code is doing, that it's something big and that it's kind of like reality bending, but we still don't know what it is. Lily is the girlfriend's character. I felt that she was kind of the weakest part, and I'm a bit disappointed that we're going to be following her from now on, but hopefully over the next few episodes they'll kind of build her up and flesh her out a bit more. The one thing I found a bit odd was the injection of her ex-boyfriend. Not so much his existence in the show, but that he just sat there at the bar and laid out their entire relationship.
It was very... it was like a real rush to give her character some actual flesh, like on the bones. We've been given bones at that point. And it was just this very ham-fisted, here's who this woman is, as quickly as we possibly can. And it did feel odd. It did feel odd.
It totally took me out of the show. And, as he was sitting there describing this, I was just thinking, I don't need to know all of this shit. All I really needed to know was that this was her ex-boyfriend, they had a bad breakup, she's now asking him for help. That was kind of all they needed to cover, but they literally went through the entire history of their relationship, and it was just kind of a bit much, I thought.
Yeah, I think this is really good. Made by Alex Garland, who did Deus Ex Machina. This first episode was actually written and directed by Alex Garland. It's got that real futurism, horror sort of thing going for it, and I'm really looking forward to watching more. Yeah, Nick Offerman was just so good.
He was so different and otherworldly in this show.
He's like a Jesus kind of character.
Yeah, he's like...
it feels like there is this following around him, and he has an answer for everything. The fact that they used, probably something more technologically advanced than deepfake, but they created like another Sergei, and they had him on camera, burning himself to death in the shadow of this huge little girl's kind of statue. And Lily was obviously sufficiently terrified by that. And you just wonder what else these, devs are capable of. But yeah, I want to know what they're doing in that building, which was, oh my God. The outside made me think of like very old school cathedral, but the inside made me think of like Vatican City, gold everywhere. Throughout the whole thing, just this real great menacing score for everything. That always helps, I think. So yeah, I think I definitely recommend this TV show. Go and check it out if that's kind of your brand, a bit of like a darker sci-fi. And we haven't tonally done anything like that in a while, I don't think.
No,
so it's
we've
good
we've been doing more traditional sort of sci-fi geeky stuff. But yeah, it's nice to get a little bit of horror thrown in there.
Let's talk about Picard. Big episode this week. Jean-Luc Picard met up with William Riker and Deanna Troi. I learnt a few things about myself this week, and the first one was in Picard, and I think Riker is my favourite Star Trek character of all time. Because when I saw him, I got got some feels that I wasn't really expecting, and I think that's told me that Riker might be my favourite character.
The thing that I really like about Picard is that in the intervening years, the characters have all matured and changed. So, like, Riker in Picard is not Riker from the Next Generation, but it is recognizably the same character, just older and more mature. I watched it with my mom, and she commented that he was less subservient. So he's more of Jean-Luc's equal now than he was when, he was number one.
Yeah, he's been a captain now, hasn't he?
Yeah, he's been a captain.
Of the Titan, is that right?
I can't remember which ship he was captain
of. I read it on a blog recently. Because he was able to deduce the entire mystery.
That was like... I loved that scene between the two of them. He was just like, you know what, you don't have to say anything, just, tell me if I'm wrong. Yeah. So this is what I think is going on. And Picard is just kind of standing there going like, damn it. He's got it all.
Yeah, I almost saw like this kind of pride, like a parental pride in him, like, this was my guy. I thought it was interesting because, like you said, Riker certainly isn't subservient anymore. Troi, in a different way, isn't subservient because Riker gave Picard a kind of polite dressing down at one point during the deduction. Troi gave him a proper dressing down. And there is this, as you've said on numerous weeks so far, the kind of reverence isn't quite there with Picard anymore. he's just a man now, and he's slightly older. Nobody minds kind of putting him in his place these days. He's not quite what he was, and they'll just freely deliver their opinion, and they will tell him if he's wrong. And I like that, because Picard and Soji obviously turn up on, is it Nepenthe or something? And Troy basically says to him, like, for fuck's sake, Jean-Luc, all she's known her entire life is lies. Just be honest with her, talk to this girl, and, you know, be there for her. And yeah, he learned, even this late stage in his career and his life, he's learning new things, and it was just nice. It was just a really nice place, regenerative soil. They grow their own crops and things like that.
It's kind of like coming home.
Yeah.
A little bit. I think the thing that I realized this week is that Picard is very much for fans of the Next Generation. If you're not a fan of Next Generation, I don't think people necessarily enjoy Picard, because there is a lot of like callbacks to the Next Generation, and part of what's so enjoyable about the show is seeing the characters continue their journey. I mean, I know you've watched the Next Generation, but you're not kind of like an avid fan, and you've sort of been a bit impatient with some of the earlier episodes. It would be interesting to talk to somebody who has like no history with Star Trek, who is just watching Picard, and see how they feel about it, because a lot of what I'm enjoying is a continuation of the story that I grew up with. And I think that's kind of what the strong point is, and they have just kind of continued the development of the characters, and they aren't stagnant. Like, sometimes when you get like these reboots or a continuation of characters, they haven't really grown or evolved in intervening time, and they're basically just carbon copies of what they were before. But in Picard, you get the sense that there has been a lot of development, except for Picard himself. He's kind of regressed a bit, and like Troy's dressing down was basically, you know, well, both her and Riker kind of called him out for being arrogant, and Troy kind of said, you know, remember your compassion, remember your kindness. Those are your strengths too, not just, you know, being the person in charge calling the shots. Like, remember your humanity, which kind of is a callback to the conversation he had with 7 and 9 about recovering from being a Borg. This show is kind of watching Picard rejoin the world, and he even said that like now he has a mission, he feels alive again for the first time in several years.
Let's talk about the other part of the episode, the crew on the ship. And we find out at the very beginning that Agnes Jurati was put on the ship by Commodore O. And she basically said, we need you to be on the ship. We want you to keep tabs on Jean-Luc Picard. And she gives her this tracker that she has to consume. And then at the end, she takes poison, presumably to disrupt the tracker. Where do you stand at the moment on Jurati? Like, where is she?
She's really hard to get a read on. Like, I get why she agreed to go along with it, because the commander did the kind of Vulcan mind meld thing, which is traumatic in itself, but she showed Jurati kind of like very traumatic images as well, and she was sort of broken down afterwards. And then she had to kill Bruce Maddox, who she was quite close to, and she's still sort of recovering from that. And yet, like, she's obviously changed her mind about being a spy. She's an interesting question. I'm not really sure where we're going to go with her. If she's going to end up like kind of being taken off the board, if people are going to realize what she did and what the consequences of that are going to be. You know, Rios kind of had this conversation with her where he said he suspected Raffi, which was I thought so out of character.
It was weird. That was my next point. Why did he go to someone he doesn't know, saying he suspects somebody that he really does know very well?
It was totally out of character. Like, when we were watching it, my first thought was, okay, he knows that she's the spy, and he's kind of setting her up to see what she's going to feel. But then he went to Raffi and kind of started to have a suspicious conversation with her. And obviously it didn't get to finish because there was the medical emergency. So the only way they can save that interaction is if he was going to have almost identical conversation with Raffi, and kind of, he suspected both of them and wasn't really sure who to trust, and was kind of setting them both up to see what their answers would be. But yeah, his conversation with Jurati was just kind of, it was weird and out of character, and I didn't believe it.
Yeah, I think a lot of the problem it seems that people are having with Picard is that they are yearning for the next generation, and the new crew aren't exactly setting people's world alight, I think. And so it's this odd kind of character development thing such as this that I think putting a few people's noses out of joint, and that's from, you know, reading certain things online. Part of me would probably want the ship to go somewhere else, and maybe they, as Riker and Troy's daughter, whose name I can't remember, Kestra.
She was an awesome character.
Oh, so good.
Like,
so
just
good.
Stole every scene that she was in
Yeah.
from the very beginning. She was just amazing.
You almost want them to take her advice and get a new ship with a new crew and just go on an entirely new direction, because I really enjoyed the kind of the Riker and Troy of it all, but there are some very uneven moments, I think, in the rest of the episode. But yeah, it was nice to see them, and I think I had some big feels when I saw Riker, and I watched like 3 or 4 episodes of The Next Generation since I watched that episode.
So we in preparation for season 3 of Westworld, we're going back and we're watching season 1, and next week we'll be doing season 2. It's been a while since I've seen season 1 of Westworld, and I have to say, rewatching it again with bits and pieces that I remembered was way more confusing than watching it through the first time. I was watching it with my partner, and I kept having to say, so which timeline are we on?
What you just said is me next week, but we'll save that for next week. Season 1 compared to season 2, it's like a child drawing on the wall up against like a kind of PhD on astrophysics. That's the comparison I make. So season 1, I think, is very easy watching. I find it to be an almost perfect season of TV, if I had to be honest. I would say if anybody approached me and said, there's a lot of superhero stuff at the moment, there's a lot of sci-fi stuff at the moment, could you suggest to me like an introductory season of TV that maybe would take me out of my comfort zone? I think Westworld season 1 is probably where I would aim them. I just think there's something of the scalpel about this TV show, where almost every word, almost every scene, almost every character is so meticulously crafted, and I don't think there's any wasted dialogue, I don't think there's any wasted time, any wasted anything really, and it just stands, very proudly as a well done season of sci-fi television. And the fact that they can bounce from the Wild West to some tech lab where they've got these based like robots and animatronics, and they're working all kinds of stuff during all the different time periods is great. Like I can't really think of any other TV show that you can have that kind of bouncing about with.
Like even the fact that they can bounce around with different timelines without signposting which timeline is which. And by the end of the season, you know exactly when everything happened, and it all lines up in a perfect little row. That in itself is pretty amazing. Normally, shows that have multiple timelines struggle a lot in making it clear what is what. And yes, there are moments, particularly the Dolores and Arnold conversations, where it's not completely clear until later that this is happening in a different time period. But by the time you find it out, it's just kind of like, oh, okay, that bit of information slots into place, and it's not really confusing. It's just kind of like a revelation, and it's revealed at exactly the right moment. So, like, yeah, as you said, the pacing is right on point. The acting is absolutely superb. Anthony Hopkins he is such a good villain. I'm kind of sad that he died in this season, because just watching him act is amazing. Like, he's such a master at what he does that, like, it's yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's a particular moment where Bernard tells a woman called Teresa, like, we program the hosts so that they will ignore things. This house, they would never find it, because when they approach it, they won't even know that it's there. They will ignore things. And they go into the house, and she's like, Bernard, what's behind this door? And he goes, what door? And that beautiful moment where you realise that you've had, there are clues, but you realise that he's a host. And you go downstairs, and she shows him the Vitruvian Man of himself, and he says, that doesn't look like anything to me, which is the kind of the ongoing gag that's what the hosts say when they might see a picture of the 21st or like the outside world. And that moment where Anthony Hopkins basically comes in and tells him to kill Teresa, and he speaks to Teresa like it's like a Hannibal Lecter, this menace in his voice is just unbelievable. And that is probably one of my favourite moments of the whole season of TV. We never know what to make of him, but then this twist, this little turn, little bit more towards the black hat, and he's superb in this. Really good.
I think like my kind of favorite moment was another scene with Teresa, where he's meeting with her and at kind of plantation type place. They're sitting outside on the veranda eating, and she makes the comment that she came here once when she was a child with her parents, and she thinks they sat at this table or one of the nearby tables. And the amount of control he has through that entire scene down to when the hosts all freeze, and she kind of realizes that she isn't in the power position anymore, that he's been in the power position the whole time, and like that interplay between the two of them I think is just really great, and was a really enjoyable moment in the season.
Let's briefly talk about just the plot, which I really enjoyed. And it was basically back when the park was first being created, a guy called Arnold realised that they'd done such a good job that these hosts were basically achieving a sense of consciousness. He said to Ford, "We can't open the park. They're basically conscious. It wouldn't be right." And they open it anyway, and he gets Dolores Dolores kills Arnold. And somehow Arnold has programmed into all the hosts that one day there will be this update where they get things called reveries, where they start to remember previous lives, but previous roles that these hosts have had within the park. And so they will hear this voice talking to them throughout the whole season of TV. They're trying to figure out who this voice is. Maeve starts remembering her daughter. Teddy starts remembering this little town being like massacred by someone called Wyatt. Dolores starts to remember Arnold. And then they realise that the voice is them. And it's this idea that throughout the whole of this show, Dolores is going through a maze, trying to find the centre of the maze. When she gets there, she will realise that it's her own voice and she is conscious. And that's kind of what Arnold wants for these hosts.
Like, I mean, you just talk about that for a minute, because throughout the season, we keep hearing, and it starts off with Ford's voice, just remember, kind of overlaid on different scenes. And I think it's in episode 9, it switches to Arnold's voice, with kind of Anthony Hopkins' voice underneath of it. The next step is that it's Dolores' voice overlaid, Arnold's voice overlaid, Ford's voice, and then eventually her voice dominates and it's just her voice saying different things. But that technique through the whole show, just having this current running through of remember, this sort of ghostly voice, and having it morph into different things as she gains kind of more self-awareness, I thought was a really interesting technique to use and really clever.
Who would you say were your favourite arcs throughout this season? I mean, there were probably 10 characters we could go into great detail talking about now, but I think it might be best just to pick our top couple.
Maeve is my absolute favourite, unquestionably, both the first time and this rewatch through. Like, absolutely love Maeve. I have a soft spot for Felix. He's like kind of a poor dumb sap who's trying his best. I don't know exactly what it is. I mean, I love the actress. I'm pretty much a fan of whatever she's in. But Maeve's character is just so poised and composed and purposeful, and then when she kind of adjusts her personality matrix so she has like kind of unlimited intelligence and stuff, she's an absolute powerhouse. Like, I don't know if anybody can really go up against her at this point. Her internal struggle as well, particularly in the last episode, she's on the train, she's about ready to go. She's already said, no, she's not really my daughter. I just need to kind of like walk away because nothing that happened in the park is ever real. But she's sitting there and she's watching this mother and daughter, and you can see her arguing with herself and trying to convince herself that her feelings about her daughter aren't real and she needs to ignore them and she just needs to escape. But in the end, she goes back. She can't fight that urge, and I found that really interesting as well.
The two techs, Sylvester and Felix, I couldn't ever stop thinking about the fact that they both had animated cat names. And I loved when she kind of met up with Hector, and they were sitting on the safe, and she's like, "I was shot," and she explained these visions that she's had, and when she finds the child's toy, and it's this whole kind of, was it like a religion built on the people who walk between worlds, which I really liked.
Yeah, that was a really cool aspect as well, and they referred to them as...
It was either the shade or the shape. I couldn't remember which one. I couldn't hear which one.
I think it was the shades from hell. The hosts had this whole mythology that hadn't been programmed, just based on... because they didn't actually shut down completely when they were supposedly shut down, so they still kind of recorded things. And so they would get these like images of these like creepy bio-suited people, and they'd sort of developed this mythology among themselves that nobody knew about except for
that's
the
just
hosts.
Delicious, isn't it? That is just such a wonderful idea,
bit of world building that was almost completely unnecessary, but was one of those details that just made it that much more real.
And when Maeve drew the picture, and she wanted to hide it under her floorboard,
and there were like
stack
stacked
of pictures.
Yeah.
That was a great moment. Any characters you didn't like? Because there's definitely one character I didn't like, and unfortunately it was the writer, Lee Sizemore, who just came across as a petulant little bitch every moment he was on screen.
It makes you wonder what the writers were doing. Because I always think that when I watch TV shows where there's a writer, and I think that tells you a lot about the person who's writing it.
He was emasculated constantly. He didn't really have any power. Ford shut him down repeatedly. Tessa Thompson's character, who was amazing, Charlotte, she shut him down immediately on several occasions.
He basically had an overinflated sense of himself, and like he thought he was the most important person in the park because he came up with the stories, and everybody else was kind of like, yeah, your narratives aren't that great.
Yeah. I have to be honest, it's kind of an obvious answer, but I think my favourite arc was probably the William arc. Seeing him go from kind of young, shy, there just to kind
White hat.
Yeah, white hat. Just there to kind of see whether the park deserved some investment from Delos. And Jimmy Simpson, I thought, was so fantastic in the role, and that kind of evolution up to when he was Ed Harris as an old man, a black hat. I thought that was a wonderful, both perfectly cast as well. And we get more of both of their stories in season 2, which I like.
The thing that I particularly liked, because William was trying to find the center of the maze, and all through the season he kept being told the maze isn't for you, the maze isn't for you, and he was just like, fuck this, I'm gonna find the center of the maze. And he did. He finally found the center of the maze, and it was not for him, and it was basically just this kind of child's toy, which was meant to represent the host's kind of evolving towards consciousness and self-awareness. And the fact that he'd been on this 35-year journey,
probably, yeah,
to find the center of the maze, and he finally gets there, and it's absolutely nothing. And everything he did to get to that point, it was just very satisfying for me that he didn't get what he wanted.
Yeah, I mean, he talks about the fact that his wife took her own life recently. What he wants is the game beyond the game, which he believes is when hosts can kill guests. Is there a sense that William is kind of on a kind of suicide mission, do you think?
Yeah, I think definitely at this point. I think he's one of those people who kind of got everything very early on, and he doesn't have many challenges anymore, and he's trying to kind of find some fulfillment in these very superficial interactions, and
it's like a high for him, like a drug almost.
Yeah, and I imagine that because I mean he kind of took the company from Logan in the past narrative, and I sort of get the idea that in his real life everybody is kind of like a host as well. They just sort of are subservient to him and give him whatever he wants, and they can't really go up against him because of the amount of power he has, and he's looking for a challenge, and he's looking for somebody to come up against him. And the look on his face when the hosts come out of the woods and he actually gets shot, he has such a look of pure joy and excitement, and you get the sense that this is the first time in 30-some years that he's felt that amount of excitement.
I like the moment where another guest came up to him and said, God, thank you so much, like your initiative saved my sister's life. He's like, fuck off, I'm on my holiday. And I think one of my other favourite moments in the entire season, where he's got, like, there's a rope around his neck, he's up to a tree, goes down to a horse, he's literally about to be hung, like properly hung. He manages to save himself, and then Charlotte walks in like a kind of gown, like a ball gown or something. Oh, hey, do you not think you're too old for this? And so the world's kind of, there's this crossover from one world to the other. This moment of incredible tension in Westworld is kind of undercut with Charlotte, the Delos representative, dressed in her kind of civilian outfit, just like, are you sure this is what you want to be doing? Like, we're doing this thing, do you want to come up to like the base or whatever? And he's like, no, like, I'm here, I'm doing something, this is important. Season 2 I have several problems with. We'll talk about that next week. But this is a season of TV that just, I mean, we could probably talk about it for an hour. We haven't even talked about some of the greater characters in it. I just think, as I said, it's scalpel. You know, they've cut off all the unnecessary stuff, and this is just a really enjoyable season of television. And I hope it runs and runs, to be honest.
I think it says a lot of interesting things about the concept of consciousness and reality, and how do we know we exist? How do we know that we're real? What does it mean to be human? And it kind of ties in a bit with like similar questions that are being asked in Picard, like, what is sentience? What makes a living creature? There's a moment very early on where young William, when he first gets into the park, and he's being shown, the different outfits he can wear, and he asks the woman who's showing him around, are you real? And she says, if you have to ask, does it matter? And that's kind of the recurring question through the whole show, is like, you never really know who is a host and who isn't a host, because they can program hosts to recognize other hosts as human. Obviously, like Maeve, hosts can be programmed to leave the park and kind of just blend in with the rest of the people. There's this struggle with Delos and Ford about making the hosts too real, and Delos wants to like kind of roll them back and make them kind of more obviously fake, whereas Ford is kind of aspiring to make them almost more real than real. And Ed Harris's William at one point says, this is the real world, like what's out there isn't real, this is more real than what's out there. Like that's just a really interesting concept to kind of roll around with and think about, and it does make you kind of question, like, what does it mean to be human?
I like everything it says about the kind of hubris of man, and it's something that's done in quite a lot of sci-fi. But I just love the fact that all those Delos people there at the end.
Yeah, they just kind of get massacred.
Just there, they're taking advantage of all these poor people, shooting glasses off their head, and suddenly it's target practice. You just wonder how close this is going to be to our actual future. We will kill every other animal. We'll have nothing else to do. We'll create a new subservient group of people, and then one day they will take their revenge. I think that's what he said. I think he suggested that whatever year Ed Harris's timeline is set, pretty much every animal is like extinct, I think he said, and this is our new sport, and that's why we created, and that's why people pay 40 grand a day to be here or something.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because we don't actually know very much about the world outside the park, and we don't really need to. We're kind of given the little glimpses that are enough to tell us it's sometime in the future, it's a very advanced society. Strangely, it's not a society that has used the technology of the hosts in human beings. Like there aren't cyborgs or people with artificial organs that are 3D printed or whatever. There's a very distinct difference between the hosts and the guests, which I guess is kind of a contrived difference, and is mostly seen from the perspective of the guests of, yes, they're different from us. Yeah, it's just a really well-made world, and really looking forward to the next couple seasons.
I think that'll do us for today. Thank you for listening. We can be found at all the social media. We have a Patreon as well, if you'd like to sponsor us. And yeah, we'll see you next week for episode 76.
Yay!